Good afternoon, familia. This is Ray Collazo, your host and founder of the Found Translation Talk Show, the talk show that stacks truth about politics and today's hottest issues. This is really the home. If you're looking for political conversation and real in-depth conversation about what's going on in our politics and news from a Latino perspective, you found your home. Welcome. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Rafael Ray Collazo, the host and founder of the Found Translation Podcast. Before I introduce my very special co-host and give you the lineup for today, I want to give you a disclaimer that this show is solely the opinions expressed in the show by the hosts and commentators are theirs and theirs alone. This show is owned and operated by Raise Media and is not formally connected to any other institutions that we are associated with. Thank you again for joining us. We have a great lineup. There's so much to talk about in politics in our news coverage. I want to bring on our co-host, communications guru, DC Insider, and just a charming fellow, Enrique Chaurand. Enrique, welcome back to Found in Translation. How was your first week on Found in Translation, Enrique? We had our opening foray. It was great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you, Rafael. It was great. I got a lot of really positive comments, people that I shared it with, folks that I really respect, not only in the industry, but people who do this as well for a living. Got some pointers and some tips on how I can always, of course, get better. But I was, I'm just flattered to be part of this conversation and part of this whole experience with you, Rafael. I know you've been doing this for a long time, but for me, jumping into this is something new for me, but really excited. So, I'm looking forward to today's conversation. We've got a lot to talk about, and we had a great guest lined up as well. So, looking forward to continuing the dialogue.
Yes, and I know there's a lot of our listeners and viewers very concerned about immigration policy writ large as it relates to the conversation happening around the southern border and just our general concern around, the sort of eternal campaign that we feel like we're having around finally getting comprehensive immigration reform passed into law. And Carlos Guevara, our colleague, and to me, one of the nation's most important policy experts as it relates to immigration policy, the Immigration Policy Director of UnidosUS, will be joining us to give us updates on all the above later on in the show. So you're going to want to stick around, particularly our immigration rights activists and people just concerned about the national conversation, the tone, and that's something I'm going to comment on later. The tone that I find most troubling around just the tone as it relates to the immigration policy conversation, which tends to dominate in our news coverage. But Enrique, we've got some other news headlines we wanted to get to and give people a sense of kind of what's happening in our politics from a Latino perspective.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to continue on that theme, around immigration. Monday of this week, members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus met with President Biden and members of his team. If you look at the readout, of course, immigration was a hot topic that they discussed, along with a couple of other things. So, Rafael, as somebody who's worked really closely with members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus over your career, you know a lot of these folks personally. I've had the pleasure of working with a few of them as well. In reading the readout and looking at what was said and part of the conversation that it had, what do you think, and how do you think it went? Do you feel like it was successful? Do you feel like there are still things to continue to follow up on? And where do we go from here? Or where do they go from here more specifically?
No question about that. It's an excellent question. And I think it was a historic meeting. And I want to take a step back before we get into the details of what me and Enrique's analysis of the meeting with the Congress between the Congressional Hispanic Caucus leadership and the White House and senior White House officials, and of course, including President Biden himself. I think one of the great values that our Found Translation community is going to get from this program, I think for the foreseeable future, is giving you more insight on the comings and goings of our Congressional Hispanic Caucus. I think oftentimes when we talk about even the context of Latino politics, we have not had the platforms, quite honestly, especially in English language, and really the insight to give you a sense of the importance and potential importance and the growing political power that the members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus provide our nation. This is a group now that, including 4 Democratic senators on the Senate side, I believe numbers 40, 41, and really has, from a numeric perspective, a potentially great leverage as a swing caucus in our politics moving forward. I mean, to give you the perspective, the Freedom Caucus, which has caused all kind of menace over the last decade or so in our politics, is actually a smaller number or a comparable number. So, there's a lot of potential for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus to show leadership. And I think we've seen, fortunately, over the last several years, with think about former CHC chairman like Joaquin Castro Enrique, and now Dr. Raul Ruiz, other leaders on the political side. We'll talk about Bullpack in a second. The leadership of Congressman Gallego, Congressman Cardenas. So we're seeing a lot of positive movement in the growing power and influence of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, but there's much more that can be done. And we'll talk about that with them directly. You're going to see members of Congress on Founding Translation have those direct conversations around what more they could be doing. But to get back to your initial question, Enrique, I think two things struck me. One was I was very impressed by the forcefulness and directness of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus around immigration issues, which we're going to talk more in depth with Carlos Guevara in our next segment, but the wider range of Latino issue priorities, from the support that Latinos need economically to address the rising cost, not just gas, but just the rising cost of living in our country. It was very informative and very targeted, talking about the conversations we're having and the work we're doing together in Florida. For Congressman Darren Soto, our Central Florida Democratic Congressman, talk about the investments we need in our public transportation infrastructure and thinking about the equity that we need to ensure takes place as it relates to the implementation of the bipartisan Biden infrastructure bill that's already been passed. And that's money that's going to start flowing into our communities in the coming years and months. Talking about the importance of student debt cancellation and the impact that's having on this new generation of Latino professionals, and how that's stifling their wealth building growth, even as educated people ascending into the middle class or trying to ascend the middle class who can't afford a home and are really struggling to move up the economic ladder despite their educational achievements. So I think overall, a very strong meeting. We were very, and I tweeted about this, very happy about the stand that they took and the increased leadership that the CHC is taking on behalf of the Latino community.
My take is very similar to yours. And I also want to tell our listeners and viewers that one of the great things about the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is they represent Latino communities all over the country. One person that you did not mention was Congressman Espaillat, who out of New York, Dominican, but somebody who...
First, if I could just jump in, along with former Congressman Ruben Kihuen, they came in together a few years back. The first two members of Congress that were formerly undocumented to ever serve.
That's right. Absolutely.
Dominicano. Shout out to my Dominicanos. No
Absolutely.
Doubt. Town, baby.
But, he is also a very forceful and tireless advocate for immigration reform, I think because of his own situation. But, a lot of times you will hear, even within, Latino circles is, Puerto Ricans, maybe not so much, but Cubans and other groups, Venezuelans maybe are not as sympathetic to what's going on, on the border, right, with Mexico and with other Central and South American immigrants that are coming through, and even Mexicans at some point. I think what the caucus has done is really coalesced around that issue, and I think that's huge. So that's first and foremost. So I thought that unifying message coming out from the White House when they were on the South Lawn of the White House at their press conference talking about that, I thought that was great. I think to me, that message of unity is really, really big. The other piece that I thought that was great was when they talked about opportunities around not only the housing crisis, right? That's another thing that's, impacting our community. They touched upon that, but they also talked about climate. We talked about climate last week, when we had Jesse Buendia on to talk about climate and how it adversely impacts communities of color, but really, how the Latino community really is, for lack of a better term, in the middle of that hurricane, right, is in the bullseye as it relates to climate. And we're seeing the impacts and the effects that it's having. So overall, I thought it was very successful. But again, lots of work to continue to be done as they move forward in this session and getting ready for the midterms.
No question. I'm glad you brought the diversity element, because we're so fortunate as our political clout increases in this country, the diversity of voices within the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. We remember a time, I recall how historic the 1992 congressional midterms at that time were, Enrique, because that was sort of an ushering in after that census of sort of like a new generation of members of Congress, thinking about people like the the Puerto Rican congressional representation tripled with the elections of Congresswoman Velasquez, who's still there, of course, providing great leadership, and former Congressman, talk about Puerto Ricans involved in immigration and immigration issues, former Congressman Luis Gutierrez, the Gallito. That was the election of a celebrated political career, former congressman, governor, etc., presidential candidate, Governor Richardson out of New Mexico. And the diversity continues. Espaillat, the first Dominican in Congress, Congressman Richie Torres, one of the first Afro-Boricua members of Congress. We talked about Darren Soto, where the BOLPAC, the political arm of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, just announced a $1 million investment to support the candidacy of a Latina, running a $1 million investment to promote and support the candidacy of Andrea Salinas, who's running for Congress in Oregon. Mm-hmm. So we're starting to see the growth and the diversity. And I think, like you said, the unity, talking about from all these issues, immigration, climate change, student debt, healthcare access. We spoke with one voice, and I encourage us to, we're going to continue to bring, we're inviting and scheduling members of Congress, members of the CHC, not only to come in here to tell you what they're doing, but also to hold them accountable, because there are caucuses of similar size, even much smaller, that have traditionally wielded much more power. And I think it's time for us to work together to empower our members of Congress to do more. Look, we have 4 in the Senate, and there was a time, Enrique, not long ago, when the CHC was a bipartisan body. And you recall that, right, years back, due to, I believe it was primarily around Cuba policy, where the South Florida Cubans, who at the time were a much more moderate group, split off from the caucus. But needless to say, there's a lot of possibilities. But let's get to the next topic, Enrique, because we're going to have there's a lot to talk about, brother.
Yeah. Really quickly, this news roundup that we do at the top here, I thought it would be important that we talk about a couple of things that are in the headlines right now. The Republican infighting after January 6th, in a very Nixonian, as I call Nixonian moment, right? These
your millennials and Z's watching this got to Google what that means. But that's good. You're right. It harkens back to that, brother.
When the tapes were released, that's correct. The tapes were leaked, or I guess you would share with members of a couple of reporters from the New York Times that are writing a book around the January 6th riot and the insurrection. Where it's Kevin McCarthy on tape essentially saying that he was holding Trump accountable for what had happened, and on the phone call with some members of the Republican leadership house, saying that he was going to talk to the former president and ask him to step down, to resign. Essentially, that impeachment was inevitable. He would not survive, and to save face, essentially, he should resign. And then earlier this week, that was Thursday of last week, and then earlier this week, another tape was released with McCarthy speaking with, again, members of his caucus, specifically around Congressman Gates and Congressman Brooks, about their incendiary comments that they were making that were critical of other members of the GOP who were critical of Trump, saying that he was the one causing, or he was the one who helped lead folks to come down to the Capitol. So what do you make of all of this? It seems like they're now are they eating their own, and what's happening there? So what's your take on that, Rafael? It's kind of crazy.
Let me start with this, that, all of this conversation is in the backdrop of January 6th, and the conversation we're having as a country, and they're having particularly in the halls of Congress, around how do we address what happened? How do we hold people accountable? How do we judge leadership and dog whistling around holding elected officials accountable? Obviously, Trump at the top, but also these other characters, and we talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, who fomented this coup that happened against our country. And I think that it would be difficult for us to properly put in context the severity of what took place. A coup, an attempted coup, happened in this country. A violent attempted coup at the center of power, literally in the halls of Congress. People were threatened, attacked, buildings taken over, vandalism, all the above. And so, when people push back on us and these Republican talking points around, oh, this is, Democrats trying to distract from, Biden's failures, we have to vociferously push back on that, because there's nothing more central than our democracy. So many of us, I think about Enrique, particularly our friends from Central and South America, whether they're from Venezuela or, some of these war-torn areas in Central America and other parts of Latin America, that talk to us, Cubans, that talk to us about, their family history, about coming to this country to avoid this kind of nonsense. This attack on our freedoms, this attack on democratic norms, for peace, not to have violence as part of our politics. And we're going to talk about the what happens when this kind of rhetoric goes too far, and how real people are impacted in a very real way. Some young women that we're going to talk about in a second that have been really impacted in a very real way because of this anti-Latino fervor in this country. So the fact that people like wannabe Speaker of the House McCarthy and others have these moments in the middle of this craziness of clarity around what is really happening and what movement am I a part of now, and now they quickly clap back and circle back and lie and cajole and contort because they literally feel threatened politically by this out of control movement that's taken over the Republican Party. But many of them share with us in private that they feel physically threatened by this movement. So it's an attack on our civil process. It's an attack on our democracy, and it's an attack fundamentally on the truth, because propaganda, unfortunately, we're seeing what happens in Russia and in Eastern Europe around the dangers of propaganda and misinformation. We're seeing it here, and our societal balance and what we thought was always sort of standard norms is really slipping. So there's so much on the line, and we cannot underestimate what's taking place. We have to hold everyone accountable to what's taking place.
Yeah, absolutely. The flip-flopping for me is really what gets me at the end of the day, right? I mean, you're caught on tape. You can't deny it. It's his voice. And he has not denied that it is. Well, he did deny it initially. And then when they said, oh, we have a tape, then things changed. To me, that is the bigger question and the bigger issue. At some point, we have to hold folks accountable, whether they're a Democrat, Republican, whatever.
Absolutely.
If you lie, you lie. If you get caught, even worse. At some point, there has to be consequences. And then as it relates to, what we're going to find out, hopefully, some people, I think a lot of folks in this country are frustrated that nobody has been arrested. No one has really suffered any consequences. And we'll see what the committee, the January 6th committee finds, and if they hold people accountable. It's also, on the Attorney General, see how he moves. But
we can't even get these real rich people to pay taxes. So and this is, look, and I say that,
$45 billion to buy Twitter, right? You didn't like it. You were being muffled or muzzled, as you said, as he thought, so here we go. $45 billion. Again, he paid more to buy Twitter than he paid in taxes. Yeah.
And people see that. And that's part of the challenge in organizing and getting people to come out and vote in the midterms, because they see this lack of accountability on the top, whether it's in these investigations or in our policies, our tax policies. I mean, the worker pieces, which we'll talk about in other episodes, this the noble fight of Amazon workers and others to unionize despite the headwinds that they're against. So there's a lot of these issues, but with all those things happening, if we don't have a functioning democracy, we don't have any of this. And so, the accountability around January 6th has to continue to take place.
Absolutely. Why don't we go to the last segment here? Because I think we want to get to Carlos. We've got a lot going on today. And again, we're going to have a great conversation with Carlos Guevara. It's been a few weeks, but two Latina students, I should say, in New Plains, Ohio, were the victims of an anti-Latino attack. Two high school students, female students. They were on the bus. They were speaking Spanish to one another, just speaking to each other, when another young lady on the bus asked them to stop speaking Spanish. One of the young ladies said, "No, I'm not going to stop it. I don't feel like I have to stop." And they continued to speak Spanish. Subsequently, they get off the bus. There was a little argument where the sister, I believe, as the story goes, the older sister of the young lady who had asked one of the young Latinas to stop speaking Spanish got off the bus. And, well, you know what? Why don't we play the video? Essentially, she was attacked, but, I know we have a video here that we wanted to show.
Yeah, so, and, we obviously want to, preface this by saying it ain't, this is disturbing. So
the young lady in the red sweatshirt is one of the Latina students, and the other girl right there to her left is her friend. They were the ones speaking Spanish. the young lady that she's speaking to is the older sister of the young lady on the bus at me stop. So the young lady that's there in that gray black jacket. And so essentially what she told her is, if you don't like it, that's on you. And then here we go. So, yeah.
I don't even want to watch it anymore.
Yeah.
Very disturbing. So
I did call, just so you know, I did get in touch with the school district because at this point, they have not said if any kind of disciplinary action has been taken against the young lady who started the attack. They did send an email to parents, and I got a copy of the email, which essentially said that they've collected all the evidence. There is a police investigation going on, but there's videos from the bus. They've shared this video with the police department there, along with statements from other students that were there. As you can see, there was quite a few students there. I guess to me, in a story that Me Too, who ran the story, and Telemundo, the local Telemundo station there in Ohio, did an interview with the parents. The young ladies are afraid to go back to school, obviously, right? And especially if that young lady is still going to school. To me, one of the really grotesque comments that was made, again, this is part of what the mother is saying, have no reason to believe that this is not the case, but that the school district told her that, well, if your daughter feels uncomfortable going to school, we should figure out a way for her to finish out the school year at home, or essentially figure it out. To me, that is not an answer. Hate crimes are on the rise, and these young ladies were targeted just for speaking Spanish.
It is 2022, and listen what Enrique just said. These young ladies were attacked by fellow students after getting off a school bus for speaking Spanish. And if you can't tell me that the anti-Latino rhetoric that supposedly is just talk, doesn't mean nothing. It's just something people say. Don't take it serious. It's just for politics. Doesn't impact our children and our community every day. That you don't know what you're talking about. And what's so sad, Enrique, and thankfully those children are okay. I mean, there's no reports of them having any serious long-term injuries. But the psychological scars are going to be on those young women forever. And for every video that we get like this, there's uncountable incidents of either violence, threats, teasing, bullying that's happening. And particularly, I know it's happening to immigrant families, immigrant young women like that. Well, by the way, Venezolanas, so my Venezuelan people out there, there's a Venezuelan young woman there that got attacked. And we're going to work with the Venezuelan community and anybody in particular to hold that school district accountable from the perspective of UnidosUS Action Fund. You can count on that. And there's in these new Latino communities, ex-urban, rural communities that the kind of attacks and the kind of nonsense that these young Latino immigrant students and young people are dealing with across the country. So I don't think we have a sense. We have a sense. But I don't think we really have the true picture of everything that's going on out there with our folks. So we just have to stay diligent and hold the school district accountable to hold that young woman accountable. And look, let's be honest about it. There's going to be some extra sensitivities because it appears that the young woman that attacked those sisters is also a person of color. And so we don't want this to be a divisive issue, but this has to be a real, for that young woman in that community, a real learning moment. That thinking about, what did Black women go through, having the bravery to just sit in a certain place on the bus decades ago, and the kind of leadership and fight and organizing and strength that Black females have had for all of us in our politics. Thinking about Stacey Abrams, thinking about countless women, our vice president serving as she's overcoming COVID as we speak. So, we don't want to make this a divisive issue, a Black Latino issue. This is about how do we confront the hate in this country, the rhetoric and the propaganda in this country, to work together in unity and love. And so with that, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to show a campaign video that UnidosUS Action Fund aired throughout the Southwest during the Build Back Better to encourage our elected officials to get on it with paid family medical leave, and also some highlights of previous episodes of Found Translation in my variety show platform podcast, Bomba Live, that'll put a smile on your face, couple lighter moments, and we'll get back with our very special guest, our immigration guru here, Carlos Guevara here, on Found in Translation, your home for Latino politics.
In early 2021, my mother suffered a stroke, and little did we know how much it would change our lives. I wanted nothing more than to stay home and care for her, but my family couldn't afford for me to be out of the workforce. There are millions of families in America just like mine. We need paid family medical leave. Congress, please act now.
Fun because Kay mentioned something and he mentioned something, that in every Puerto Rican's house, todos los sábados domingos había una clase de música.
Yeah.
Whether it be Latin jazz. En mi casa era Felipe Rodríguez, Daniel Santo, who else? And a few of these old school artists, these bolero guys, because every time papi se daba 3 o 4 palitos y llegaba, tú sabes, para pedirle perdón a mami, eso es lo que se tocaba, seguida.
Welcome back to Found in Translation, your home for Latino politics, and talking about the hottest news headlines from a Latino perspective. I know, Enrique, that music stuff on the weekends ain't just Puerto Ricans. I know that when you think about, your family doing family chores on Saturdays or family get-togethers, la música siempre era the centerpiece of it all, brother.
Absolutely. I'm sure Carlos, igual, we're both somos mexicanos, venimos de mexicanos, so for my mom, it was música, mariachi. She loved Juan Gabriel. So it was always Juan Gabriel was on.
The legend.
Juan Gabriel. And
my mom loved Juan Gabriel.
Pedro Fernandez, and I grew up listening to that. It was an interesting dynamic in my house because my father, as you know, Rafael was a musician from Guadalajara, but he played rock music. He was into the Doors, Moody Blues, those kinds of things. He's a big Beatles fan, so he was a drummer. So my dad, he liked mariachi music, but so we'd be listening to Peter Frampton with my dad and some of his old music. The group he played for were called Los Spiders, So anyway, and then my mom was like, "All right, that's enough of that, and we're gonna put on the traditional Mexican."
Keeping it real.
Yeah,
you got to. Yeah, we lost Chente not too long ago. Talk about a Mexican. Unfortunately, during COVID, we lost so many Latino music legends, and we're gonna keep. We always keep our artists. The creative class is very important in organizing. I know. We've shared many times, but always worth sharing. Enrique's family is the leaders of making movies, one of the most important cutting-edge Latin pop rock bands in our country. And they always engage with us in organizing, and we're connected to a lot of the creative class. My brother's in the hip-hop game for a long time. So they're always very important voices. So always want to bring them top of mind. We welcome back our homeboy, Carlos Guevara, the Director of Immigration Policy at UnidosUS. And for my money, one of the most important analysts and leaders as it relates to immigration policy in our country. So, Enrique, I know there's a lot going on with the immigration conversation in our country, and we wanted to bring on the best to give our Found in Translation listeners an update. So, Enrique, let's get this conversation going with Carlos, brother, because he's got a lot to share with us today.
Absolutely. Carlos, thanks again for being with us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. There's a lot happening right now in the immigration sphere, right? You've got your ear to the ground. This is the work that you do every day. I wanted to just start off by asking you, what did you think about the meeting with leaders of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and the White House? I know part of the readout and part of their press conference, they did talk about, immigration with the president. So is there anything there you would like to share, anything of importance for our viewers to know about, and any inside baseball that you could give us that would be great?
Well, first of all, it's great to be back on the pod, Rafael, Enrique. It's awesome. I definitely resonate with the music references earlier in the house as well. Listen, this is a busy week. First, Congress is back from their Easter recess, so that's the kind of the first thing that's popping. And all these things everything that's happening on this issue is happening kind of in a broader context, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later. But there's been discussions about what's going on the border. There's been discussions about continued COVID funding. And then there's been discussions about, how do we move the Biden agenda forward to address the needs of longtime undocumented residents in the country. So we were actually really heartened to see the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, a lot of our champions, frankly, who we rely and count on and really done some great work over the years on Latino issues, immigration issues, have a chance to sit down with the president this week to lay out, a series of asks writ large on all Latino priorities, on what the president can do with his own authorities, his own executive actions, his own executive powers to protect Latinos. But a sizable, as we understand, portion of the conversation also focus on this issue of immigration. And for us, one of the priorities is, as much as we also desire the president and his administration to put a stamp on this issue, to remove the vestiges of the Trump anti-immigrant, anti-Latino, really harmful policy of the past 4 years, including Title 42 on the border, which we can talk about a little later. We really want him to deliver and really put a stamp on things like delivering for DACA holders, dreamers. If Congress is going to act, what is he going to do about it? What is he going to do for our tepesanos, folks who are here with TPS from Central America, contributing in many cases as essential workers during the pandemic? How is he going to extend protections for them? We expect him to do that. And for the broader population as well. Again, folks who we alluded to earlier, who stepped up during the pandemic, and their families using things within his toolbox, that's within his power to do so, and urging him to do that. We can't wait. We have a precious moment to act right now, and we're really encouraged that the message was delivered, and we hope that those discussions continue in the weeks and in the months ahead.
Let me jump in, Enrique. Carlos, great to have you on the show again, brother.
Nice to see you, man.
I want to talk about my TPS people, my Central Americans, and my Haitians for a second, my Caribbean people for a second. I want to share something with y'all. Y'all know y'all my buddies, regardless of work. And I just moved into fairly new construction, so there's construction happening all around me. Every single one of the construction guys that I see every day, interact with, all from coffee, some Guatemaltecos. And there's 2 Guatemaltecas that do the drywalling, 2 Guatemalan females that do the drywalling in my construction. Okay, talk about stories. Now, I don't know the immigration status, but my point is, I'm sure many of them are TPS recipients. Some of them. My point, though, is that the people that are in this limbo temporary status are part of our community. So tell people, just make sure people are clear what TPS is, and the communities that are most impacted by that. And I want to make sure our Central American viewers understand that whether it's with our Unidos hats or our Found Translation community or just as advocates, we're there fighting for the Central American population, because our same community that's here in limbo with TPS, many of them have relatives and loved ones that are dealing with the challenges of applying for asylum on our southern border right now, which we're going to talk about more in a second. So give us an update specifically on the TPS piece, brother.
Yeah, absolutely, Rafa. And it's interesting that you mentioned that in your community in the Philly area. Here in the DC area where Enrique and I live, there are twice as many people with TPS, which I'll explain in a minute, than there are DACA recipients. That folks are more familiar, more of these individuals who we refer to as dreamers. So it's a very big population in key pockets, Houston, Texas, Miami, Los Angeles, where there's big populations. And as you mentioned, Rafael, folks who have just essential to our economy, essential to our pandemic response. But basically, for folks who are unaware, TPS, temporary protected status, is that what it stands for, is a power that the administration, that any president has, to be able to essentially shield folks from in the country who are undocumented from deportation, and provide them a chance to work on a temporary basis if there are conditions in their home countries, humanitarian wars, in some cases natural disasters and so forth, like what we saw in Haiti in 2010. To allow them to remain here safe, because they can't go back home. Imagine these conditions that they would be going back to. And most recently, just for context, the country designated the country of Ukraine, for the reasons that are going on, as we well know, in Eastern Europe and the war with Russia, for those protections. Those folks who don't have status here in the United States now can apply for TPS. And, there are some, in the context of Central Americans, folks, it's by some estimates about 200 to 300,000, depending on the estimates that you believe here, individuals that have TPS based on a natural disaster that happened in the early 2000s. And those folks have, been here, have families here in the United States, American citizen kids, And what we're asking the administration is to update that, allow more individuals to come in, and not because it's just we think it's the right thing to do, but there's been continued natural disasters and difficult conditions in their countries that make them have a strong case. And in so doing, also expanded for the first time to Guatemala, which would provide TPS protections for some 1 million estimated individuals here. So that's one of the big asks that we have with the Biden administration, and to do so in a way that they've done already for Ukraine, for Cameroon, and for the Haitians as well. We think that, and by the way, we should mention for the Venezuelans in this country as well.
That's right.
So
Rightfully so.
Clearly, they
We
know
worked very
that they
hard
have
with
this tool.
the Venezuelan community for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Clearly, they have this tool. They know they have this tool, and we're urging them to use it to make sure that more people have access to it from Central America.
So Rafael mentioned Title 40. Well, you both mentioned Title 42 really quickly, and that's been in the headlines here recently about what does this mean? Actually, Mayorkas, of course, testifying yesterday, as a matter of fact, on Senate Budget Committee hearing, which I'd love to get your take on as well too. That was rather contentious. But I think there's some confusion on what Title 42 is, right? And I know that it has to do with the pandemic, right? It's more of a health, to protect the health of our citizens. But can you tell people really quickly what Title 42 is and explain that?
Yeah, so briefly, Title 42 is an authority that exists on our laws that essentially allows the government to expel, is the word, expel people trying to come into our borders, to the ports of entry or between the ports. So anyone trying to enter the United States, including asylum seekers, for health reasons, expel them. They say, nope, you gotta stay outside the borders. From our perspective, we think that, and it's not just us, there's a letter by some 1,300 doctors when the Trump administration issued that, we believe a really pretextual reason to really do border security. They called it junk science, what they were relying on. There was really no health reason to do it then. And we can debate that and so forth. We happen to agree with it, but certainly 2 years later, after the pandemic, as things are starting to open up, we're having conversations about no masks, people who are vaccinated. We think that it's highly outmoded and time for it to go. And then the other piece, Enrique, is that, well, okay, what does that mean? Is this there's this whole narrative right now, well, the border's just going to get flooded with folks, right? First of all, it's a racist dog whistle, number one. Number two, it's not like the administration or the government stops having authorities to enforce its immigration laws. What we've been saying is you shouldn't be using a health law, in this case, Title 42, to do migration policy. You should be using migration laws to do migration policy. And we have those tools in the toolbox. And we want the administration to articulate that a little more forcefully to make folks aware that they have, in fact, a plan. But they can absolutely and will, and our expectation is that they, will go back to the pre-COVID levels of how things are being managed. So that's the debate right now. And you mentioned Enrique, the hearings, 3 hearings for Alejandro Mayorkas, the first Latino DHS secretary, and Javier Becerra as well testifying this week. And not surprisingly, the Republicans are using this issue, not the issue of inflation, not the issue of masks, not the issue of vaccines. It's the border dog whistle again to go after him. And in some cases, as you said, it's been very contentious, if not pretty nasty, in my opinion.
Well, I'd love to just hear what you both wanted to, your perspective on this, because Carlos, you're a former appointee like I was. You worked at DHS, right? I believe in the office of the counselor, right? So, Carlos, just for our viewers, is an attorney and very well versed in these laws. There are Republicans that are that are calling and have called for his removal, but his impeachment, as how they put it, right? They're trying to impeach a member of the president's cabinet here, and actually was brought up yesterday, and I can't remember which members, but again, during Mayorkas' hearing, he said, well, I hope you take these comments seriously, because if not, you may not be sitting here next year, and I may vote for impeachment.
They directly threatened them. There's no question about it.
So from a political
by the way, only happened once in our history of our country that a cabinet member has been impeached.
Like in 1897. I mean, come on.
On a bribery charge under 50 years ago.
So this is craziness. But so I'd love to hear you both. I'll start with Rafael, and what do you think about that, Rafael? And then, of course, would love to hear your comments too, Carlos.
This is, first of all, this is about this playbook. And I don't even want to say Republican, because this is like another movement that, this is not the Republican Party that I recognize and we all recognize. But this anti-democratic, tinged with white nationalist movement that's overtaken this party is that, the targets, the easiest targets are, who are the people they target? It's the people of color within the Democratic establishment, whether it's Vice President Harris, the squad, the list goes on and on, so, in this case, Cuban American head of DHS is an easy target, easy foil, even though you could argue from the left that this hasn't been like the most super aggressive immigration policy the Biden administration over the last year. I mean, Title 42, it's been a year plus. It's still there on the books. And, how the Haitians got treated, and there's other things we can point to. But the bottom line is that they're using the Republican, and this movement is using the immigration whistle, as Carlos said, as a dog whistle, and as something to scare white moderate voters and white people about the changing country. And I mean, the irony of this whole situation, when I was reviewing in our prep, Enrique and I were going over the DHS budget that was proposed, and Mayorkas was talking about how he's going to implement the budget. So all the other things, if we recall, DHS was created after 9/11. So the principal cause, the purpose of this agency is to protect the safety and well-being of our country. And I don't think anyone logically would argue that, this policy challenge, this legitimate policy challenge with the flow of immigrants and asylum seekers and other people on our southern border is a legitimate policy concern. There's no question about that. But to say that's the most dangerous thing, and the thing that's going to dominate a hearing, where you're talking about, we're 3-4 steps bad moves away from World War III, what's going on in Eastern Europe, Ukraine and Russia, the ongoing challenge of China, cybersecurity issues, the list goes on and on. Domestic terrorism, which is probably the biggest threat to all of us day to day. So in the midst of all these issues, and by the way, all those issues are addressed in that budget. The thing they want to focus on is, hindering the rights of asylum seekers, and again, trying to couch a legitimate policy challenge with the basis of Latino immigrants are dangerous. And so that, to me, and we're not going to talk about too much here, but let's be honest about it. How some of the Democratic senators responded, the challenge, I think that let's keep it real. I'm gonna keep it real. That we had was they were basing some of their issue with the way Biden was rolling out the end of Title 42 with the assumption that this is like this humongous crisis that's going to cause mayhem, and it's not. It's a challenge. But in a country of 330 million people, we should be able to process a couple 100,000 people on the border in a way that's fair, thoughtful, and humane.
Carlos, please.
That's absolutely right. Again, as I was mentioning earlier, it is curious that, with all the stuff that maybe they hadn't broken through on the mask stuff, on the vaccine stuff, on the, we're supposed to be the party, or the Republicans supposed to be the party of tough on foreign policy and Russia and so forth. It's just striking that they keep coming back to this particular dog whistle. And look, Rafael, I agree with you. Are there challenges on the border? Are there seasonal migration flows? Are there 2 years of pent up energy, if you will, because of one, a pandemic, and two, complete dismantling intentionally by the previous administration of our asylum laws, our asylum processes, and so forth, that are now bubbling up? And then on top of that, add the fact that for the first time in history, we got more displaced people all over the world because of war, climate, and so forth. You put that together and you have this situation. Look, I don't mean to skirt the fact that there are challenges, but we can do it. And we have the right laws to do that under our immigration laws, and trying to use a health law to really stretch the reasoning of that to do border security, to migration law is just wrong, one. And then two, it's a continuation of a vestige, one of the most harmful, most iconic anti-immigrant, anti-Latino policies of the previous administration. And we do hope that this administration keeps its promise to end this, and to also show that they can walk and chew gum, manage this border, which we know that they can with the authorities that they already have. Before
you jump in with kind of, and we want to get Carlos Guevara's take on what do we do now? What do we need the administration to do? What do we need Congress to work on? And what is the responsibility. What do we want to see at a DHS? Because that is a legitimate part of this conversation.
Yeah.
But I want to give the political piece here, which I want our activists around there, particularly our activists, the people that are working day to day, hardworking people that want to make sure we have a strong turnout in the 2022 elections. They're worried about all kind of races around the country. And me and Enrique and other regional experts, you're going to see people in the coming weeks here on the ground in places like Arizona, on the ground in places like Nevada, on the ground in places like Florida, Texas, talking about these congressional races, these Senate races, these governor races that have huge impacts on our democracy and sort of the political makeup in 2023. But so as part of that, I want to give people an understanding that one of the political challenges we have here is that when people like me and other activists get up and talk about dog whistles, the problem on the part, there are Latino communities in places like Starr County and other places on the board that say, hey, there's some issues that, this flow impacts us day to day. That's legitimate. We need to listen to that and bring those people into this conversation, because those are some of the people, quite honestly, that are giving Republicans an opportunity, because at least they feel like they get hurt on that issue. And then when and look, I've been critical on this show about our customs and border that I think there's some real toxic cultural issues in that department that we need to address. But when some of our folks in those communities hear that, they don't think about the bigger picture. They think about, well, my cousin, that's a good job he's got working there. And he's a good guy. He's not racist. He's a Hispanic. He tries to treat them well. Why are you attacking my cousin? Why are you attacking our family? Why are you attacking the economic engine of this local community? And so there's some healing. There's some bridges we need to build. And we need to have those conversations. But because we're not acknowledging that personal element entre la familia here amongst the activist class, most of us don't live on the southern border from a proximity perspective, and people that are just working folks that are almost kind of apolitical. This is just a job for them, and they're doing the best they can. They're getting turned off by some of our rhetoric. So I just wanted to bring that political dimension to this conversation. I think in the coming weeks we need to, and I look forward to having leaders from South Texas and Southern Arizona and Southern California on the show, New Mexico, coming on the show to try to bridge some understanding, because if we don't break through and hold that ICE accountable, but not turn off our Latino brothers and sisters that are connected to that agency, we're going to have this continual political challenge. But Enrique, let's get back to Carlos's analysis of what do we do from here.
Well, Rafa, I think on that particular point, again, we don't want to gloss over some of these real challenges, and then folks that again, I'm from San Antonio, Texas, but I haven't lived there in 15 years. I have family there, and folks all up and down the southwest border, right? So I understand the diversity of folks' opinions on this issue. I think for me, I would offer kind of three things that this administration can do, and the first is, I think I want them to get on the tallest mountain or whatever their perch is and say, we got this. We have the tools to manage the border. We have a plan. We have this. And I think part of what folks have been feeling, certainly in the past 2 years and beyond, is a lack of kind of discontrol at the border, that there's chaos there, and some of it's intentionally fed by the news media to create a sense that that there is just floods of folks and all these things. Some of it's also actual mismanagement of the past couple of years, where we've not made the right investments, we've slowed down processes, and so forth, right? So if this administration can proclaim we have a plan, we've got this, and I'm confident that people, when they see that there's a way forward, that look, migration, I think many folks will agree, and people moving is a part of life, but they want to see it a managed border. They want to see it a properly administered border, more than they want to see a border wall. So I think that's number one. Number two is, I do think that the administration, so when we look at the issue of immigration, Unidos Action Fund, our partners, we look at it obviously in the totality of the issue. We look at it in an intergenerational way. We think about our kids' kids, and so forth, right? And for me, close to my heart is the nearly 6 million American kids that have an undocumented family member or parent. And I think this administration needs to show that they're delivering for those communities. That's why the opportunities before us here on what the president can do himself by expanding DACA, by authorizing TPS for countries from Central America and using its royal authority to protect essential workers are within grasp, and we should continue to demand that the administration use those authorities. And then the last thing is, you got to tell folks that you did this. And it's not just about, hopefully we get these wins on immigration, but remind folks of what this administration's done in the past couple of years to kind of stop the bleeding, if you will, with the pandemic, the supports there, and so forth, and really sell those wins. So I think there's some opportunity here, but they need to get moving quick. That's what I would also recommend.
Thank you, Carlos. So if there's one thing you can leave our listeners, our viewers with, as Rafael said, you know, we do have other activists in this area that are listening, but if there's one thing, right, what's the call to action? The one thing that we want right now, what would that be if we can go to the administration and go to our elected officials and ask for?
We really want the administration, look, if Congress is going to continue to not act on the issue of immigration, which we think was always the preferable choice, is that we can't wait. And we need the president. There are solid ideas. There are solid legal authorities that he has to act on his own. And we can't have him waiting anymore. Let's start using those authorities and protect folks who have been here for a long time, shield them from deportation, give them a chance to work and live peacefully in this country.
I tell you, Carlos, you know, I don't just bring you on the show because of your hair game, which is very strong today. I got to give you love for that. Whatever product you're using, you need to send me a text.
Nice.
But I bring you on here,
some of it. Yeah.
And I need to. Well, that's another story. Your hair game is always strong, brother. But and we bring you on here not just because you know you're one of the great authorities on the subject, but you really do care, and I admire you so much for that. And, you know, we can't look as a Puerto Rican, and we're going to talk about, I have some thoughts on some of the issues impacting the Puerto Rican community on the island in our last segment with Carlo and Enrique. But, you know, one of the things that I just want people people watching the show is that there's a lot of unity here. And we understand the connections between what's going on and the inhumane treatment and really the second-class citizen treatment or the humanitarian angle here that we cannot overlook, with the second-class status issues impacting Puerto Ricans on the island and the diaspora. So there's a lot of unity here, and I want people to see those connections and intersectionalities. And Carlos, thank you so much for your leadership, brother. And I know you got to get back to work, but please keep us posted. You know, you're going to be our regular immigration expert on the show, and we look forward to continued conversations about what's happening in Washington and what's happening with immigration policies.
It's always a pleasure, and thank you for what you're doing, guys. This is really important to get our messages out here to the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's Carlos Guevara, the Director of Immigration Policy for UnidosUS, and also when he works on behalf of the Action Fund as well. Enrique, wow, Carlos always brings a lot to the table, brother. I know our Found Translation audience always learns a lot when he shares his analysis.
Absolutely. You know, the one question that I didn't get to, and I know because we were running long, but I do think, and I want to mention this because I don't want folks to think that we're not insensitive or don't understand the issue on the border, that we still have a lot of families, right, that are children that need to be reunited with their families, right?
Amen.
There are still, hundreds, if not thousands of kids still on the border who need to be reunited. And I know the administration is working on that. As a matter of fact, there was a line item in the budget to continue that reunification effort. I wanted to ask Carlos about that, but we'll make sure to get that on the next.
No question about it. And I do want to shout out our friend in the Latino journalism space, Julio Varela from Latino Rebels. Regularly on a monthly basis will tweet out that number, which I think has fluctuated between 8,000 to 10,000 during the Biden's term. So absolutely, one is too many. But no, we definitely want to. I appreciate you bringing it up, and I'm sure we're going to invite Julio to the show and other immigration journalists and experts, and I'm sure we can dive into that conversation. But we did have a couple of things we wanted to wrap up the show really quick, and we appreciate people watching Found Translation. I did want to note, that we have continued. Enrique, why don't you give us an update on the work we're doing on behalf of the UnidosUS Action Fund and kind of how we wrapped up our Earth Day activities. Last week we had Jessica Buendia from Green for All and Dream Corps talking about the work we're doing together. So I know we've got some content that we're releasing that I wanted to give people a sneak preview of to look out for, particularly in the Florida markets in the coming days and weeks.
Absolutely. We had a piece that ran in Diario de las Americas about some of the work that we were doing we commissioned a poll. Well, we worked together with Green for All, Jesse Buendia's organization, to talk to newly registered Latino voters in Central and South Florida about climate. And I'm sure no one is surprised to hear, but there are really concerns about amongst the Latino electorate and the Latino community in general about climate change, right? The increase in electricity bills, right? Flooding, especially for those that live on the coastlines, hurricanes and just the brute and how much stronger they're getting, right? And in Florida now, there are so many insurance companies that have gone belly up because they have been paying out these premiums the last decade. That there are very few choices for Floridians to even get homeowners insurance right now. So it was a nonpartisan, right? It was 33% Republicans that were asked the questions, 30% were Democrat, and 65% were independent voters. And to a T, all of them were saying that climate change is a big issue. So I had a great piece that ran in Diario de las Americas. We are going to be having an opinion piece that's going to run in the Orlando Sentinel about not only that, but about how Latino voters in general, specifically in Florida, though, care about climate, and calling on those elected officials that are currently in office and those that are running in the midterms to pay attention to Latino voters as it relates to climate as an issue.
And I will be releasing an op-ed in the coming days in the Florida market related to those issues. And I think the biggest thing I want people to, there was so much good information. And again, I encourage you for you all to look up some of the findings and some of these statements and op-eds that we're releasing in different platforms. But it was incredible, Enrique, because in South Florida specifically, the bipartisan agreement. Latino Republicans in South Florida, some of those right-wing Latino voters in our country, and they are with us 100% on, almost unilaterally around the impact of climate change, and they want their officials, regardless of party, to address them. So a lot of interesting information there, and it's so interesting how our politics are divided, but when you really kind of dig deep into the polling, there's so much consensus around these issues, whether it's climate change, education, healthcare access, so we have a lot of opportunities to continue to organize in our community.
Absolutely. And not to mention the rise of sea levels. It's a little bit different, right? If you're on the coast, right, as opposed to central parts of Florida, right? You may have different concerns about climate, but at the end of the day, Latino voters resoundingly had said yes.
No question about it.
Climate is a huge issue.
So two other quick things I wanted to get to. The first was there's been a couple of news items impacting the Puerto Rican community I wanted to note on. First of all, if people saw, there was a recent Supreme Court decision, 8-1, that basically the Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution did allow, and it was permissible, essentially to deny Puerto Ricans that live on the island Social Security insurance benefits because they were not protected in the same way that mainland U.S. citizens are protected. So Justice Sotomayor was the only dissenting vote, noting that this is clearly a case of discrimination against U.S. citizens. But in Neil Gorsuch's majority opinion, he said, well, that's the laws we have. And if you want that changed, you need to change that in Congress. Biden's actually, the White House, even though his DOJ didn't drop the case, is calling on Congress to address the issue legislatively. This is yet another example of how Puerto Ricans on the island have been treated, as a colony for 124 years, and 105 of which as U.S. citizens. And so there's lots of conversations happening. There's actually two different bills in the Natural Resource Committee in Congress to potentially address the decolonization of the island, potentially the statehood of the island, or other options. But I just wanted to note that, and we're going to have other experts. Federico de Jesus, a noted Puerto Rican policy expert based in D.C., is kind of our go-to on policy issues. He'll be invited to the show in the coming weeks so we can take deeper dives into these issues. But, I bring it up because, first of all, it's an important issue I want to make sure we address, and the Puerto Rican political stuff is close to my heart. But, that we have to continue to challenge. That's why we need to have platforms like Found in Translation. I love to go on MSNBC. We love to see our Maria Cardonas out there doing our thing on the national platform. So we have to dedicate some time to really point out these inequities. So when people talk about, well, why Black Lives Matter, that's divisive. And, housing inequities is something that we have to continue to talk about, particularly in Florida, but really all over the country, Arizona, everywhere. that we're having, kind of this renewed redlining dynamic happening in our country from a housing perspective, that these inequities in our immigration policies that are just embedded. I mean, how we continue to treat Native Americans in this country, they're just embedded in our culture and our politics, and we have to continue to address them and confront them. So there's a lot of, there's a lot there, and we're going to continue to highlight the issues impacting from a policy perspective, the island of Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican community. The last thing is, Enrique, I wanted to ask you a question. Mexican ballers took an L this week. People don't realize the latest Latino sports sensation, Jose Alvarado, the point guard for the New Orleans Pelicans, has agreed to be the point guard for the Puerto Rican national team. Former NBA legend himself, Carlos Arroyo, who I know you remember fondly from his days in the NBA,
absolutely,
is now the general manager of the Puerto Rican national team. But my question to you is, Jose Alvarado is a Queens guy, Queens, New York guy, Puerto Rican and Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
How come the Mexican national team wasn't more aggressive at recruiting this guy? There's a lot of Puerto Rican point guards. Andres Corbelo's going to be doing this thing in St. John's. Jose Barea still plays in Puerto Rico. We got a lot. I mean, there's plenty of options for us. And how were you able to scoop this brother up? Jose Alvarado, the latest NBA sensation, giving Chris Paul headaches in the NBA playoffs, driving the Suns to the brink because of this little pesky guy.
I have no comeback for that. I'll have to say that the Mexican national team, the Mexican men's basketball national team, needs all the help that they can get.
So we always try to keep it light and support our ballers here on the Found Translation Talk Show. Siga adelante, Jose Alvarado. Thank you so much, Enrique. Appreciate. I thought this was a great episode, and we encourage people to continue to follow on social media, UnidosUS Action Fund, for more updates on the political organizing work that Enrique and I and many others are doing, and continue to support and follow Found Translation Talk Show. We're